Hello everyone, welcome back to the Shaggy Turtle Show. I'm your host, Twin Michael.
And I'm alive.
And welcome back to part 2 of our Playing with Power mini-series, where we look at old Nintendo games. Later today we'll be looking at some SEGA games, but first let's talk about, some arcade-style games.
Wait, I thought you were talking about...
I know what I said. I have a few games that fall into this strange category of arcade-style games. And if that sounds like a vague description to you, that's because I can't think of any other category to file these under. It's hard to describe, but I think you know what I mean. These games typically take place on single screens and are action games of some type. And some of them weren't even arcade games, like Wrecking Crew. Wrecking Crew is one of the original NES launch titles. It stars Mario, and you must destroy a set amount of objects in a time limit while avoiding living eggplants,
bombs,
and Mario's original rival, Spike. One thing to note is that Mario can't jump, supposedly due to how heavy his hammer is, which makes no sense considering he was swinging hammers around like a madman in his previous adventure. Must be out of shape here. Since you can't jump, you have to figure out the optimal path to destroy all objects on the screen, and you can get stuck and have to restart the level. Thankfully, you can restart the level at any time with the push of a button. There's 100 levels to beat, and it's pretty good. There's also a level creator, but you can only save levels in the Japanese Famicom Disk System version, or the eShop re-releases. Dig Dug 2 Trouble in Paradise is a game I don't see a lot of people talk about. Many people know about the classic original, but the sequel is a little more obscure. I remember when I got this game, my mind was blown by the fact that one of my favorite arcade games had a sequel. As with many sequels back then, Dig Dug 2 is pretty different from Dig Dug 1. You still go around popping pukas and fragars with your pump, but instead of digging through the ground with a shovel, you play from an overhead perspective and use a jackhammer to hit fault lines and create cracks in the ground. When an entire chunk of the map is separated, everything on it will sink into the ocean, including you if you're not careful. It's not the classic the first one is, but it's still a fun game and not a bad sequel, all things considered. It reminds me of Super Pac-Man in that regard, which is among my favorite arcade games of all time. Speaking of personal favorites, this is Joust, and it is awesome. In Joust, you play as a medieval knight who rides on the back of a flying ostrich, who must land on top of his buzzard-riding nemesis, while also avoiding lava hands and pterodactyls and making sure to pick up the eggs they drop before they hatch into evil knights that will kill you. That's pretty much all there is to it. A simple, if ludicrous concept that gives way to challenging gameplay. Joust was an extremely popular arcade game in the 80s. I even got to play the cocktail version of it at an indoor flea market once. Being such, it got many home ports. There's not really much more I can say about this one. I love how it looks, I love how it plays, I love how it sounds. It's even two-player, and it gets pretty hectic since you can hit each other, and you did that on purpose.
In all honesty, this is one of my favorite arcade games, and if I ever get around to owning arcade cabinets, this is definitely one I'm going to purchase.
I should at least mention Joust 2 Survival of the Fittest. This game unfortunately never got a home release till the Midway Arcade Treasure Collection. I've played it briefly and it seems pretty fun, but I don't quite understand the transformation mechanic, and the vertical orientation makes everything feel kinda cramped. But maybe someday I'll come back to this game and explore it some more.
Since we're still on the topic of arcade games, I think it's high time we got around to discussing these. The Tengen carts.
I've already mentioned RBI Baseball and that I don't care for it, but what Tengen is really known for is publishing unlicensed arcade ports. Many other people have already discussed Nintendo's extremely restrictive licensing terms. Turns out Nintendo has always had problems. Imagine that. Tengen wanted to negotiate for something less restrictive, but Uncle Tendo wasn't having it. Tengen published 3 games under the standard terms, these being Pac-Man, which I don't own, RBI Baseball, and Gauntlet. However, behind the scenes, Tengen was working to reverse engineer the 10 NES lockout chip, and would eventually succeed, releasing many of these black cartridges. The history behind the black cartridges is kind of interesting, and I would recommend reading about it, but we're here to talk about the games, so let's do that. Let's start with another personal favorite of mine, Alien Syndrome. Alien Syndrome is a top-down shooter inspired by films like Aliens. Shocker, I know. And naturally, 2 playable characters means this game is multiplayer. And you'll have to work together to win because this game is hard as balls. Your goal is to rescue all victims in a stage within the time limit, while avoiding or shooting any aliens you come across, and fighting a huge boss at the end of each stage. It sounds simple in theory, but it is anything but. One aspect of the game I really like is the bosses. These guys are both challenging and disgusting to look at, and pretty creative in their designs. The arcade version was originally produced by SEGA of all people, but unfortunately never received a Genesis port, which would have been awesome. However, you can play the arcade version of the game as an unlockable in Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection on PS3 and Xbox 360. Another arcade classic is Gauntlet. Not much to say here, it's a port of the arcade classic. My only real complaint is that it keeps the quarter-eating aspect of the arcade version, where your health slowly runs out as you play. This works in the arcade version since you can always put in more coins, but it makes getting to the NES version near impossible. Moving right along, we have Vindicators, a game where you play as a tank in a top-down perspective, complete with tank controls that take some getting used to. The game also has constantly draining health in the form of fuel, which you need to pick up in order to stay alive. You can also pick up stars, which work as currency for the end-level shops, where you can buy fuel, smart missiles, and upgrades for your tank's speed, range, power, and shields. There are enemies and bosses, and it's pretty fun. I recommend you check this one out. Taking a break from Tengen really quick to talk about another tank game, Iron Tank, The Invasion of Normandy. This game is an official release, one of many from famed arcade developer SNK, who most would know as the creators of the legendarily expensive Neo Geo. And it's definitely a tank game, slow and clunky. But more than that, the controls are a bit confusing, and there's more to this game than meets the eye. The D-pad controls what direction you move in. B fires your machine guns, but those won't be enough to take out the stronger enemies. No, you need to fry those flubberknuckers with your cannon. I'm hilarious. The cannon is what complicates the control scheme. You fire it with the A button, but moving it requires you to hold down the B button while turning. This allows you to keep the cannon fixed in one direction while you move in another. And you need to master this in order to win. You can even power up your cannon with 4 different types of expendable ammo, including rapid fire, armor-piercing rounds to go through walls, bomb shells that explode on impact, and a long-range power-up. And you can even turn them all on at once, although this will burn through your limited reserves, so you should choose your weapons wisely. You'll also have to keep an eye on your energy. You can refuel a point when you collect any power-up or run over the tiny soldiers. But you need to keep an eye out for E and R power-ups, since R in particular restores all your energy. There's also a rare question mark nuke power-up that kills everything on the screen. And you also have a reserve tank you can fill when your energy is full. Keeping your energy up is paramount to victory, because you will get hit. A lot. You're quite the glass cannon for being, you know, a tank. And I'm pretty sure this game is trying to give me a seizure. Thankfully, you can continue at any time via a checkpoint, and there's also a fairly simple passcode system you can use to continue your game. And here's a fun fact for you while I'm at it. While the American version of the game names your character Paul, codenamed Snake, the Japanese version actually tells you that the main character is actually Ralph from the Ikari Warriors series. Alright, here's a classic, Afterburner. Wait, another SEGA game? Yep, turns out a few SEGA games landed on Nintendo's console. Alongside Alien Syndrome and Afterburner, there was also Fantasy Zone and Shinobi, both released by Tengen. And in Japan, a company called Asmic released Altered Beast, Takara released Space Harrier, and Sunsoft made Afterburner 2. That's a total of 7 SEGA titles on NES. I had Shinobi as a kid, but all I can remember from it is this headache-inducing music. Afterburner, on the other hand, has no such problems. It's a pretty good conversion, all things considered. I even took the liberty of comparing several different versions of Afterburner 1 and 2 across multiple platforms, and found that the NES version has an ironic advantage thanks to its limitations. Every other version I tried playing had varying levels of disorientation. It was very easy to lose track of where everything was and get blown to bits. The NES version does not have this problem. I always felt like I was in complete control of my every movement. I'm not saying it's the best version, that still goes to the arcade. In addition, despite the music not being ear-bleedingly awful, it's actually pretty good, all things considered. I think the Genesis and arcade versions still have better soundtracks. Afterburner 2 on Famicom is almost exactly the same, but everything is better. It's a shame it only came out in Japan, meaning you either have to own a Famicom or emulate it. Smoother gameplay, better graphics, voice samples, and improved music. It rocks.
Although, personally, I'm a fan of the Afterburner 3 soundtrack. What can I say? I'm a fan of cheese. Oh. And for those of you expecting a Top Gun reference, joke's on you, I never even saw that film. And besides, my music references are cooler.
Still on the subject of arcade games, we have Commando from Capcom. This is a basic top-down running gun. It's pretty fun, but the graphics are pretty silly looking. Not much to say about this one, but it's pretty good, and I'd recommend picking it up if you see it for a good price.
Okay, actually, you know what, I'm gonna take over here for a second because you did not cover Commando thoroughly enough. I mean, it's not a bad game, but there are a lot of issues with it. I mean, first and foremost, the graphics, which I said were silly looking, they really are silly looking. Like, I can't even believe what I'm looking at. They look like little clay figures running around. And the victory screens don't even have faces. This is entirely unscripted, by the way. I'm just sitting here, like, jawing into the microphone because I need to rectify this. There's actually some interesting stuff here because the best thing about Commando, in my opinion, is that without it, we wouldn't have had Mercs, which is a much better game. You can get it on the Sega Genesis, and you can get the original arcade version as part of the Capcom Classics Collection on PlayStation 2 and Xbox, or Capcom Classics Collection Reloaded for the PlayStation Portable. The Genesis version was released on the Wii Virtual Console, but that was canceled years ago. And, yeah. Oh yeah, it's also on the Retrobit Generations plug-and-play console, but I'll leave that up to you if you want to get that or not. Point is, Commando's not bad. But if you're going to play it, you should play the arcade version, and if you're going to play it, you should really just play Mercs anyway, because it's a much better game. But hey, you find this for a few bucks somewhere, go ahead, pick it up. It's not bad, it's just, I brushed over it way too easily. Moving on.
Capcom is fondly remembered for its many great action games, like the Mega Man series, Bionic Commando, and its many fantastic Disney games. But not all of them are well known. Just look at The Little Mermaid. No, seriously, look at it. This is a game based on The Little Mermaid, and it's good. This game stands up there with the likes of DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, and Aladdin on Super Nintendo.
The Genesis version was better.
Ah, come on, man, cut me some slack. I grew up on the Super Nintendo version.
Yes, I see your point, and it is a good point.
Free. What Nintendo don't.
Counterpoint.
Corner, now.
I'm honestly shocked. Out of all the movies to receive a video game, The Little Mermaid is the last one I'd expect a Capcom action game treatment of. And yet, here we are. Its treatment of the source material is suspect at best, but the result is a great action game where you swim around, bubbling enemies with your tail and throwing them at other enemies, a la Mario 2. You can even use these silver shells to open treasure chests that give you upgrades. It's decently challenging and pretty original. Pick it up if you see it for a good price.
Of course, it would be silly for me not to bring up my favorite Capcom NES game of all time, Street Fighter 2010, The Final Fight. But I get the strangest feeling I've talked about this before.
Street Fighter 2010.
Oh well, let's go over it.
In Street Fighter 2010, you play as a cybernetically enhanced Ken in a universe where he won the Street Fighter circuit and went on to become a respected scientist. Naturally. Unfortunately, his friend Troy has been murdered, sending Ken on a quest of vengeance across the galaxy. The story is different in the Japanese version, but I want to keep this video moving. The game is action-packed. You jump all over the place, shooting enemies with what I like to call machine gun Hadokens, doing backflips and uppercuts, climbing on walls, watching cutscenes for dramatic cliches, but still kind of really dark for the NES plot, and dying. A lot. Yeah, I've beaten this game before, but it took a few good hours of patience. But when you win, you're on top of the world.
And on top of the world seems like a great place to stop. We've officially talked about 23 out of 33, and we are in the home stretch. So join us next time for the last 10. I don't know, is that the right number? I'll be corrected. Anyway. Anything you want to add, Shag? That's right. You're in the corner. Anyway, I'm Quinn Michael. This has been The Shaggy Turtle Show. And like it or not, I'll be back in the next video. Bye!